Thank you all for coming. So a few more. Take-home points. Sorry, forgot this isn't a microphone for here. So take-home points. To reinforce the message that Adele presented, and in front of all the seats is a copy of the paper that's cited on this slide. We have some extra copies up here if you didn't get one. But basically, the dietary guidelines are not appropriate for population-wide diet recommendations. But that's exactly what they're used for, especially in regard to restriction of dietary fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and salt. We're in the business of converting forage into animal products. Yet we have a government that's spending billions of dollars to tell us that what we're producing is harmful to human health, and then, of course, is spending billions more to treat the conditions that are arguably the result of their dietary guidelines. Okay? Reducing the recommended intake of sugars and starches from what they recommend would produce health benefits. Increasing intake of animal protein above current guidelines would benefit many. Remember, when we're going to take in more animal protein, we're also going to take in more animal fat, and that's a good thing. Guidelines may, in fact, lead to an increased risk of weight gain, diabetes, and chronic disease, and I just wonder how much worse it can get. I love this quote. We've all been the unwitting subjects in a long observational study, the hypothesis of which is that a low-fat, high-carb diet will reduce obesity, diabetes, and the other so-called diseases of civilization. In my view, it hasn't worked out all that well, which I consider a marvelous understatement. Remember, we were told to eat this way so that we would avoid all those conditions. And in fact, it's arguable, and I believe probable, that all those conditions have increased as a result of us eating the way that they recommended. Thank you for participating. Unintended consequences. These were mentioned. I don't want to believe that the people that suggested this as a way of eating, that these guidelines intended for this to happen. I just can't believe that. Okay, but it's happened. And we in the forage industry ought to know about unintended consequences, right? So perhaps we can be a bit charitable. And if kudzu doesn't work for you, how about endophyte infected tall fescue? All right, but sometime we have to admit that mistakes were made and figure out what we're going to do now, how we're going to correct the situation. Just own it. So this is my sort of personal story. I'll share it briefly. Christmas 2007, my moment of clarity, right? You take the camera, you set it up on the tripod, you hit the timer, you run back in to pose, and then when you look at the picture, you wonder what's wrong with the camera. And in case any of y'all don't know this trick, when you put your picture in a PDF, in a PowerPoint slide, expand it 10% vertically, but leave it the same horizontal, you'll look great. Or so I've been told. So at that moment, I kind of realized something had to be done. I was at least 220 pounds, which placed me just into the obese category. I was manifesting many symptoms of prediabetes. Several of my friends had been diagnosed with prediabetes. I'd really like to avoid diabetes if that's at all possible. By that point, my wife had been on her own journey of discovery and application for about 7 years. But she's a smart enough woman to know that talking to me about it before I was ready to listen to her talk to me about it probably wouldn't be helpful. So when I was finally ready, I had an in-house expert, which was very handy. And then by 2010 Christmas, I had lost 50 pounds. And I'm still today within 10 pounds of my low weight. I've normalized blood sugar, I've normalized blood lipids. I've done this by eating about 3 times the animal products on a daily basis that the government recommends. So what impact might that have for the animal agriculture in the United States if that were adopted on a wider... So, here's some information. This is just sort of look for these conditions in yourself. If you have 3 out of those, by definition, you qualify as having metabolic syndrome. And the most effective way to treat metabolic syndrome is with a restricted carbohydrate diet, which means eat your own product. That should be easy. As we look at these sorts of things, we begin then to question lots of other areas, and sustainability is one. You hear that, it's a buzzword. It's nice and fuzzy. Everybody likes it, but they don't really know what we're talking about. It's like saying healthy diet. Who's going to argue about, no, I want to eat an unhealthy diet? But when you start saying, what does that mean? That's where it falls off the rails. We don't know. I would argue that producing wheat sustainably or corn sustainably, when our society cannot sustain the cost of a population eating diets based on wheat and corn, is ludicrous. What is unsustainable is the current medical epidemic that we're facing. And it's arguable that that's the result of eating carbohydrate-based diets. Okay, now, since we're in the forage industry and we're producing animal products from perennial pastures, if that's not sustainable, we don't have sustainable agriculture. But then we combine that with the fact that we can produce a product that will improve the health of the population at the same time, and now we have a really compelling case. Let's trundle out Liebig's barrel, shall we? We're all familiar with this idea that there's something that's limiting. Right? There's some factor in this complex situation that is the most restrictive thing to plant growth or animal growth or production, however you want to define it. Let's adopt this for health. And if we're right that the most limiting factor in human health today is the fact that we're trying to live on carbohydrate-based diets rather than fat-based diets, then that's what needs to be attacked first, and until we do, we aren't likely to have a meaningful impact in any other area. Understand what I'm saying? So arguments about grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. If we take the typical American today, who's eating the typical American diet, where they're eating less than 5 ounces of red meat a day, less cholesterol than they would get from 2 large eggs, right? 60% of their calories from carbohydrate, and we exchange whatever beef they are eating for grass-fed beef, do we have any reasonable expectation to see an improvement in their health by them eating grass-fed beef? I don't think so. I don't think we have any right to expect that from the literature. And we certainly don't have justification to tell somebody to spend more for it. Okay? Now, if we were to take those same people and exchange some of their carbohydrate calories for calories from animal products, regardless of how those products are produced, we have every expectation that we will see, as has been reported, a dramatic improvement in their health. Now, maybe somewhere down the road, okay, so we increase that stave, maybe we'll get to somewhere where some other factor comes into play, but we have not even begun to do the work that would tell us that. So arguments about organics and this and that and the other, we have no way of knowing. So, what would be the impact on our industry? Oh, that's really rude. Thank you. I wonder who I can blame for that. Oh, that would be me. Huh. What would be the impact on our business if Americans started to look at our products as health food? I would think that would be of interest to this industry, to this organization. How about if we get them to believe it's diet food? May even be able to get more. Health food? Really? Tofu? Health food? Why do we believe that? Nah. If it come down to a contest between T-bone and tofu, what do you think going to win? People only eat tofu because they think they should because it's supposed to be good for them, right? That would be a nice goal, to let our food be our medicine and our medicine be our food. I've heard it said you can pay your farmer, you can pay your doctor. I got nothing wrong with paying doctors. I'm okay with that. But I like to pay the farmer too. So again, I think the evidence is compelling that meat is actually heart healthy. If it's part of a restricted carbohydrate diet. And meat is medicine, I think, is a message that our industry needs to promote. It's medicine for the person, it's medicine for the soil, it's medicine for the environment. So at this point, thank you for attending. I want to thank again Adele and Dr. Bales for coming. And open it up for some questions. We've got about half an hour. Please, Russell.
You'll be embarrassed that you could observe a lot just by looking at it. I found a lot of truth in that, and I'd just like to share with you what I've observed in my hometown, which is not unlike so many more. It has a Walmart grocery. And I see the people coming through, and I see the fattest, most obese, whose baskets are laden with processed foods, including the 2-liter sugar drink, all of that. Why? Because it's easy to fix, would be one thing, because most of it today can be microwaved, which explains why we're getting part of, or less part of the dollar. Now then, the point is, I watch how they pay, and I'm reminded that 47 million people in our country today are on food stamps. Mm-hmm. And these are the people that are buying a great portion, and it's leading to all this obesity, I believe. Nobody's looking at it. Our First Lady has a war on obesity, but she's requiring restaurants to post calories and all these other regulations that are going on. Is anybody looking at that correlation of when food stamps were not allowed to be used for these processed foods, as occurred along about the 70s again?
Mm-hmm. Adele and James, could you maybe come up here so that, do I need to pass off the microphone for the? Okay.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can rephrase that, and you can tell me if I got it wrong. That you're wondering if there has been an impact.
Well, we remember when food stamps
were
not
created.
allowed to be used for processed foods, and I'm just asking you to observe who's buying the processed foods, and you'll find they're being paid for with food stamps today. The industry, the processing and packaging industry, pushed for this qualification, and it occurred in the 70s when we saw it shoot up, and continues to soar.
Right.
We have more and more people on food stamps in our history.
So as a researcher who maybe doesn't remember quite far back as you do, I was not aware.
I don't even remember it.
I was not aware that there was a time when, and I'm a grad student always looking for a research project, I was not aware that there was a time when processed foods were restricted. But you made an excellent point just then. You really answered your own question, which is the way that our USDA is set up right now, we want people on food stamps to buy those processed food products. And in fact, the Women, Infants, and Children's program, which is different from food stamps, but there's actually a restriction on eggs. And these women these are pregnant women or women with very young children, they are not given any vouchers for fresh meat at all. Now, what I know as a researcher is that the what we call the epigenetics effects, so the effects of an environment on a baby when it's developing in the mother, that it's extremely important that those babies not have protein-restricted diets, or 30 years later they'll end up with these metabolic diseases that we're looking at, or even sooner, as Dr. Bales is seeing them. So it's really, really important that these women receive protein in their diet, but they are actually restricted to about a dozen eggs a month, about a pound of cheese a month, and no red meat whatsoever. So back to your question, I think that that would make a very interesting research project. I'm not aware of any at this point, but I know that our food industry and the USDA actually promotes those products among the low-income populations.
Another point similar is, I think it was Dr. Lacefield or something
Well, that's very true. That's very true.
There's also some direct correlation I find in the good doctor statistics, about 43% of fifth graders being obese and the number of people on food stamps too.
Other questions? It's also, it was interesting for me to learn that people who have looked at obesity further back have observed that obesity has occurred in extremely poor populations throughout the world. And so one of the myths today is that obesity is this disease of affluence, when in fact what we've seen is that in unimaginably poor populations people become obese, where you'll have undernourished children and an obese mother. And to explain it with a conventional mindset would say that the mother is eating food that the child is lacking, and everything I know about maternal behavior says that's not real likely to happen. But that's the extent that some people will go to cling to their mindset. Are other questions, I hope? Sir in the back.
Since we can forage chickens and we can forage hogs as well, how do they fit into this equation in terms of volume and carbohydrate discussion?
I guess I'll take that one. I think that what we're looking at is still the idea of animal products regardless of how they're produced. Now, there may be aspects to environmental or profitability or other issues that would shade us one way or another when we look at different management systems. But per se, the product itself, as it replaces some of these highly refined carbohydrates from the human diet, it's that replacement of those substances in the diet that's most important. And the method in which those animal products are produced is much, much less from any of the research that we currently have.
The other thing is breeding. So we've bred chickens and, I don't need that, chickens and pigs to be more lean, so that they're more acceptable to us in this idea of a lower fat diet. And then we inject them with glucose and saline solutions to make them more juicy and palatable to the consumer. So there are some real issues with that. So we're adding sugar to foods that never should have had sugar in the first place because we took the fat out. So we find sugar everywhere now, even in meat, and those products that you mentioned, turkey, chicken, pork, are some of the ones that we've bred to become leaner and have then had to process further with sugar in order to make them palatable to the consumer. We also remove all the fat. We trim it. We remove skins. I mean, I do remember back in the early 80s, boneless, skinless chicken breasts were a rarity. You could not find them in the supermarket. And now it's getting difficult to find them with the skins on. So that's really changed in our food system.
You know, in terms of making effective change, it occurs to me that as interesting as the food pyramid is and the nutritional guidelines, that good many of the people that Russell alludes to, and candidly, virtually everyone in the generation behind us, in front of us, whichever it is, probably are not looking at those guidelines. They probably don't have that particular chart in their kitchen. They probably do have a television set beside the microwave, and they probably have Rachel Ray on a regular basis. And in some instances, I know my kids are big fans of the Food Channel. How do you, in terms of an industry input, how do you convey a message such as this to a broader and more impactful audience that's not us sitting around feeling good about ourselves because we're talking to each other?
Since I'd like to consider I keep speaking into this like it's a microphone here and it's for the recording, so forgive me, Chris. As part of the fraternity, let me first say that I think one of the first things we ought to do is, stand in front of our own mirror and take a look. And how are we doing ourselves personally? Okay? And then if we decide that we'd like to make a change, then educate ourselves Even if we don't decide we want to make a change, educate ourselves, because we can't trust the traditional sources of information. I think that that's been one of the messages today. We have not been well served by those people whose job it was to convey us certain information. Then, on top of that, I think we have the opportunity, because I've heard repeatedly throughout this conference various flashes of a message which which are echoing the official dietary guidelines. And then somewhere down the line, we could start talking to our beef industry and say, when are we going to stop promoting our product, our 29 lean cuts of beef, as if fat were a bad thing? So there's a lot of that we can do, and I think ought to do, within our own organization to educate ourselves. Because yes, of course, we'd like to think that we're producing a good product. I surely hope that's the case. But just as we all like to think that we're doing things that are not harming the environment, sometimes we need to learn that there are ways to do it better. So we need to learn that. Then the people that know us can learn from us. And then we can take it sort of toward the next step. Adele works to try to influence from one direction. Maybe we know people who know people. Maybe we can start getting political or policy action moving in a different direction, or maybe from a different flank, and try to, as I say, confront the narrative. The next time you hear somebody say that fat is bad, if it's appropriate and you have the relationship, see if you can have a conversation about it. You know, the next time you have a graduate student who's justifying their work because the product is going to be lower fat and that's going to be heart healthy, you might want to have a conversation about that. So there's those things that we can do. And then we can start worrying about maybe some of the professionals who would be consultants on programs like you mentioned. I'm sure they have a resident RD that advises them on, but that's not, you can speak better to RDs and their relationship to food industry and guidelines, and maybe you can speak, Dr. Bales, in terms of what sort of impediments there might be within your industry as far as doing something different than the current policy.
Well, it's certainly a challenge that you face, and when as a physician, you know, I was also taught that low fat is bad, and the high fat's bad, and that low fat is what we need to follow. But 95% of physicians believe the same thing. 10 years ago, it was probably 99% of physicians. So you still have a big disconnect between really what the literature shows and what actually is fact. And so it takes chipping away. I think it's a great question: is how do you do this on a and get everyone involved, because there's so much money in the food industry with the processed foods and other things like that the government is supporting. How do you go against that? And it's as Peter said, it just takes chipping away and continue to stand up and make that fight.
But if the educational system is still putting that input into the up-and-coming doctors and all of the students, you're fighting a losing battle, because they're going to just keep producing more people.
We're fighting a winning battle. I am here to tell you. We are fighting a winning battle. I am in School of Nutrition right now, working on a PhD. I can tell you that I have gotten lots of pushback from the folks who are established, because it is their paradigm that we're chipping away at. But a week does not go by that I don't get an email from a young person who says, I saw you on the internet, I read something, blah, 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 whatever. Tell me what I can do to change the system. And these are people going into health policy, into nutrition. There's a whole paleo physicians network out there now. the tide is turning. But I thought Peter said something very important. When they email me and they want to go into nutrition, I tell them not to. And the reason is this, because nutrition is going to be the last tower to fall in the fortress. But we can make real serious changes by going out into each of our own professions and challenging the paradigm there by not perpetuating these myths. When you hear somebody say the word healthy, that even if you don't challenge their definition of healthy, that in your brain you don't automatically respond with, oh, that must mean low fat, high carbohydrate. That's how things change. Now, I proved that I hope I did, with my presentation, that the way that policy changes isn't just through science. So it's not just a matter of waiting until the professionals in nutrition come around, because we're going to be waiting a while for that. But we can change through cultural and social pressures on those people to begin thinking about things in a different way. And that is happening. That tide is turning, I'm happy to say.
Sir in the back.
Yeah, it's a multi-dimensional issue, and we appreciate the fact that, what we eat, if we know the right thing to eat, it's a good thing, and it's true, it has been perceived, wrongly, that, meat, was the bad, while it was the good one. But that's the aspect of what you eat. The other thing is what we do. And if you go, back to the Bible, which has also been mentioned here, somewhere they had to write, those who do not work should not eat. Now, our lifestyle have, been such a, if you're successful, you have the luxury of eating, and not working. Exercising, even if you know is good, our lifestyle has come to make it also expensive. If you want to exercise and burn what you ate, you have to pay to a gym and all that. Something which would happen in the way you live. You go work for your food, you walk to a place and your stuff. Right now you just have to drive, you sleep and just press a button. You are working the whole day, using only 2 fingers. So
Is that how you type? Is that how you type instead of?
I may be 10, but what I'm saying is that I may be burning only 2 calories, okay? When I could have burned, 100 and matching what I eat. So we also need to bring, something also in addressing our lifestyle. That, if somebody is biking, he's not someone we should look down upon. It's someone we should admire.
Certainly, there's no question that exercise is important as well, and is part of the whole prescription of a healthy lifestyle. And it needs to be done at a young age. And that's why, as a pediatrician, I think we can impact kids if we address that at a young age. But, with society, everything, you want it to be easier. How many times do you drive around Walmart looking for the parking spot that's closest to the door? Why don't we park at the other end of and walk? And those are type of things that you can. It is a lifestyle modification that we have to try to address. And with kids.
So one thing just to mention, and that is that we have a lot of animal models that show what happened when you calorically restrict, and the animal, if it's restricted sufficiently, becomes less active, right? Because the body is partitioning energy where it has to. And so here's a question for you. If you, and I got this, I don't know from who, but if you were to be invited to a dinner prepared by a world-famous chef, and all your favorite foods were going to be served, and the host said to be sure, bring your appetite, come hungry, what 2 things might you do to prepare yourself to have an appetite for that meal? You might go jogging or play some tennis. You might skip a meal. Right? So the advice that we're getting is to eat less and exercise more, is what we would intuitively do to ensure that we had a good appetite. And in a culture where, thank God, and God bless America, we've got plenty of food available, you can resist hunger for a while, but not indefinitely. But what we have here is a way by which we can eat and our bodies work properly so that when we have enough, we say, that's enough. Whereas if we eat in another way, our systems are altered, and so we don't get that message that we've had enough. So yes, it's a multi-factored approach, but part of the mythology that we have is that exercise is critical. And I'll just point out that Dr. Bales mentioned that when he had children, prior to his becoming aware of restricted carbohydrate, he had them trying to diet and exercise and was not seeing results. So is exercise important? Yes. Is it sufficient? No. Is it controlling? I don't think so. I think the evidence is that they've never been able to successfully demonstrate exercise as a means of satisfactory weight loss. And if you read the statements carefully enough, what you'll see is they're saying to maintain a healthy weight. Once you get there, then it's important that you exercise. And then they'll talk around it a bit and they'll say something about, well, since obesity is simply a matter of calories in versus calories out, then you need to increase your activity increments so you burn more calories. And that's a fallacy. And as was shown, his successful diet with children is not calorically restricted. I think that's just a really critical thing. And you had a, sorry.
And one quick point to that is what I found is the protein is the key. And when you eat more protein, you're not as hungry. And I ask all these kids and all these parents, and the one thing they say, they're not as hungry, they're not eating as much. When you eat a meal high in carbohydrate, your body makes insulin, your blood sugar drops, 2 hours later you're hungry again.
And you don't feel like exercising.
And you don't feel like exercising. You feel sluggish. And when you eat a meal high in protein, it stays with you a lot longer, it suppresses your appetite, and that's really the key. If you're battling hunger, you may be able to stave off a day, maybe 2 days, but long term you're not going to be able to stave off. And these kids that I saw, they did not change their exercise really significantly one way or the other. Of course, I mentioned that they should exercise more, but none of them really made the big changes. The changes they made were the diet, and the protein really is the key.
I guess my question is for Dale. I recently Googled paleo on the internet. Over 75 internet pages devoted to it. Sounds like from what I read, this is what we're talking about this morning. What do you have to say about that?
That's true. And paleo diet is just repackaging really what we've always known about human nutrition. So previous to the dietary guidelines, what any nutritionist would recommend to you is to eat a diet with adequate protein, because protein is our most important macronutrient. So I'm getting ready to give you, anybody who wants to go out and write a #1 selling diet book, start taking notes now, 30 grams of protein at every meal, okay? That's adequate. So it's not high protein. I mean, he says high protein, but that's high in relative to what we are normally told to eat. So protein at every meal, vegetables, non-starchy vegetables at every meal, and then whole grains or whole starches like potatoes or sweet potatoes as your activity level warrants. Okay? So you need the protein and the non-starchy vegetables for your nutrition. And fat comes as a package. So this means when you're eating your protein, you're not trimming off anything. You're just eating the way nature gave it to you. So you're going to get everything that you need. So because fat has nutrition in it. That's the part we left out of this whole discussion. Fat has nutrition in it. So it's good to eat your fat. It's not just not bad. It's actively good. So protein with the fat that nature gave it, non-starchy vegetables. You've got all your nutrition right there. You control your weight through activity and carbohydrates and starchy foods. That's it. Well, it depends on your activity level. If you're a marathon runner, you can eat white foods. That's fine. You can eat Twinkies. That's fine. If you're
Lard's white, isn't it?
lard is white. And the cauliflower is white. But the point is that you need to get your nutrition first, and that's what the paleo diet focuses on, is getting nutrition first. And then carbohydrates are primarily just calories, and you balance your calories with your activities. So anybody wants to go out and write that book, I just gave you all the information you need to do it.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Dr. Bales.
Thanks.
Since you're driving home and not going through the airports, just as a little thank you, this is something from an indigenous product out of Oregon called myrtle wood. You can cut animal products on that. And thank you. Dr. Bales has to go back mid-afternoon or so, be around through lunch. Adele is going to be here through the dinner tonight and leave tomorrow, and I'm here. I am available at any time if your organizations want to hear something along this line, you have questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm not the source of this information. I just want to help people find the information. So if I can help you with that, I'd be more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Very nice job.
Adele,
Very nice.
something else.
You did a great job.
It's a model and spread you guys around.
Thank you much. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Do you still engage social activities?
Absolutely. Anytime. For you.